In a room where power wears tailored suits and smiles are weapons, a figure moves through the shadows, unseen by many, judged by all. His presence fractures the polished facade, stirring discomfort that ripples beneath forced laughter and polite nods. Dressed modestly, carrying the weight of countless unspoken battles, he becomes the silent target of whispers and dismissals that slice deeper than any words. But what no one suspects is that this quiet man holds a force that will shatter their world, a revelation that will flip the script and expose the true nature of power and prejudice. This isn't just a story of exclusion, it's a reckoning waiting to unfold. If you want to witness how the invisible become unstoppable, hit like, subscribe, and share where you're watching from. What do you think lies beneath the surface? The truth is coming. Stay tuned. Deshaun Rel stepped into the cold grandeur of Ardent Capital's headquarters with the confidence of someone who had earned every second of this moment. The entire atrium gleamed with success, steel beams, sunlight bouncing off towering panes of glass, minimalist sculptures curated to suggest refinement. This was a space designed to intimidate, and it did. But not for him. Not anymore. He wore a simple, well-fitted blazer, a pressed shirt, dark slacks, and dress shoes that weren't designer, but polished. He carried no assistant, no entourage, just a slim leather folio containing what should have been his golden ticket, the presentation that could take Rel Dynamics to the next level. As he approached the reception desk, the young woman behind the marble counter gave him a quick glance, eyes scanning from his shoes to the fold of his jacket lapel, her expression unreadable, her smile thin. Before he could speak, she slid a black plastic visitor badge across the counter without looking up again. "Deliveries use the rear elevator," she said flatly. For half a second, he hesitated, unsure whether to correct her. But he chose calm over confrontation, sliding the badge into his pocket and replying in a measured voice, "I'm here for the pitch meeting. 28th floor." She blinked once, checked her screen, and asked without interest, "Company name?" "Rel Dynamics." She typed slowly, as if the name were unfamiliar, which it likely was. After a pause, she pointed, not toward the polished glass elevators where sharply dressed executives were entering, but to a narrow hallway behind her, tucked out of view. "Take the service lift. Same destination." He nodded once and walked away, not letting the twist in his gut show on his face. The hallway was colder, dimmer. The walls were painted a dull gray. The service elevator itself groaned as it descended. When it arrived, a janitor stepped out, wheeling a bin of cleaning supplies. They exchanged a brief glance. Deshaun stepped in. No music, no mirrors, just silence and the faint scent of floor polish. He checked his watch. Still 20 minutes early. When the elevator stopped at 28, he stepped into a hallway of brushed steel and muted lighting, where the noise of urgency filled the air. Assistants rushing, the rhythmic clack of heels on tile, phones ringing in quiet tones. As he turned the corner toward the main conference floor, he passed a junior associate holding a coffee tray. The young man did a quick double take and said, "Hey, facilities goes through. Wait, sorry. My mistake." The look in his eyes said everything. Deshaun didn't respond. He kept walking. A digital directory near the reception area displayed that morning's pitching companies. The sleek interface rotated through names in a slow carousel. Deshaun watched it complete a full cycle. His name wasn't there. Neither was Rel Dynamics. The firm had confirmed twice, email, calendar link, even a call. Still no sign. He approached the receptionist for that floor, a tall woman with the frozen posture of corporate poise. "Hi, I'm checking in for a 9:45 slot. Deshaun Rel." She looked at her tablet, brows knitting slightly. "I don't see you. What's the company name?" "Rel Dynamics." She scrolled. "It's not listed. Do you have an email?" He reached into his folio, pulled out the confirmation printout, and handed it to her. She barely looked at it before saying, "Okay, let me check with logistics. You can wait over there." She nodded toward a couch by the window, behind a tall plant. He thanked her and took his seat. 20 minutes passed. Names were called, one after another. Sharp-looking duos in tailored suits strode into the pitch room with confidence. Deshawn stayed where he was, every few minutes watching a receptionist glance at him, whisper something to a colleague, then return to her screen. He opened his folio again, checking his pitch deck for the 5th time. The numbers held. The projections were strong. He had beta tested the product in 4 cities. His AI was outperforming legacy systems by double-digit margins. And yet none of it mattered here. Not when no one would hear it. A pair of founders, young, white, chatty, walked past him and snickered. One whispered, "Thought that guy was the Uber driver." These were his peers, at least in theory. They were men and women who occupied the same pitch slots, pursued the same dollars, fought for the same traction. But none of them looked like him, and none of them glanced his way for longer than a second. Most kept their distance, not out of overt hostility, but through that particular brand of casual avoidance that disguises bias beneath a thin veneer of disinterest. It wasn't just the silence that made it worse, it was the orchestration of it. As Deshawn sat reviewing his pitch deck again, a marketing associate strolled through the room, holding a few folded signs in her arms, each one printed with colorful corporate branding. She placed them with casual precision on a series of reserve tables for VIPs, keynote speakers, and media guests. When she reached the small table beside Deshawn's seat, she paused, looked him over, and placed a laminated sign down with a faint smirk. It read "Vendor Check-in, Lower Level." The implication was sharp and deliberate. Deshawn stared at it for a full 5 seconds, unmoving. He said nothing, but inside something recoiled. She didn't even pretend it was a mistake. She simply continued walking as if she'd done something routine, leaving the sign in front of him like a silent accusation. He reached forward slowly and turned the sign face down, pressing the corner against the table to hold it in place. No one stopped him. No one cared. Moments later, a catering team entered with carts lined with silver trays and carafes. 2 assistants moved through the lounge like practice dancers, placing down porcelain plates stacked with freshly baked croissants, fruit bowls, warm pastries, and artisan coffee mugs bearing the firm's gold emblem. The scent of roasted beans and sugar filled the air, and the founders gathered near the tables with easy familiarity, taking turns complimenting the selection and asking for dairy-free options. Deshawn remained seated, his folio closed in his lap, watching the flow of service as it moved deliberately around him. When one of his assistants arrived at the cluster of chairs just feet away, she offered every person around him a coffee or cappuccino, one by one, smiling gently, confirming orders, offering oat milk. She made eye contact with each person except him. Her hand hesitated for a split second near his armrest, then continued past. She didn't speak to him, didn't offer him a cup, didn't acknowledge his existence. He watched her serve the man directly across from him, a young founder with a startup focused on crypto wallets, who took his almond croissant with a grin and asked, "You guys have matcha too, right?" The server nodded enthusiastically and darted off to fulfill the request. As she left, the founder looked briefly at Deshawn, offered a tight, polite smile, then immediately turned back to his phone. Deshawn exhaled slowly through his nose and sat back. His stomach growled once in protest, but he ignored it. It wasn't the food he wanted. It was space, respect, recognition, just a fraction of the courtesy extended so freely to everyone else. To his right, a group of 3 founders chatted loudly about previous investments they had secured from Arden Capital. One of them, a thin man in a sharp gray suit, laughed while recalling how he had winged his Series A pitch but still walked away with 7 figures. Another chimed in, mentioning how the partners preferred founders with grit but pedigree, guys with hustle but from the right schools. As he said it, his eyes swept the room and stopped momentarily on Deshawn. He said nothing further, but the implication landed. A minute later, the 3 of them glanced toward Deshawn's seat again and laughed at something that wasn't said out loud. A different associate walked through the room with a clipboard and began handing out feedback forms for post-pitch surveys. She gave them only to those whose names were on the visible pitch schedule. Deshawn extended his hand slightly when she neared him. She gave him a blank look and passed him without slowing down. He withdrew his hand and looked away, clenching his fist onto the folio. He knew better than to cause a scene. He also knew that every gesture, every omission, was stacking against him like bricks. None of it could be called aggressive. None of it could be proven malicious. But it didn't need to be. It worked precisely because it was quiet, sanctioned by silence. Another round of coffee arrived. A senior investment manager entered the lounge and made small talk with a group near the window, shaking hands, asking about product market fit, congratulating one founder on landing an exclusive pilot program with a logistics giant. As the conversation drifted, Deshawn overheard one of them refer to him in a lowered voice. "Guy in the back's been sitting here a while. Lost maybe." Someone else responded, "Maybe he's shadowing facilities. That or he's with ops." They laughed quietly, the kind of laughter meant to be heard without being acknowledged. Deshawn lowered his head slightly, eyes fixed on the black leather of his folio. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't one person's mistake. It was collective choreography, a well-rehearsed system of soft exclusion. The badge at reception, the rerouted elevator, the missing slot, the sign, the skipped coffee, the clipboard. All pieces in a subtle play designed to remind him he didn't belong. Not in the way they did. Not in a way that was welcome. The lounge was still buzzing with voices, caffeine, and the bright, empty confidence of founders used to being listened to, while he remained stationed in a corner that may as well have been another building. His name still hadn't been called. His confirmation remained a phantom. The laminated vendor sign lay face down on the table like a private joke. And now, as he checked his watch again for the third time in 5 minutes, another slight arrived in the form of a smirking intern with a clipboard and a too-casual swagger. The kid looked to be barely 22, slouched like confidence had always been handed to him instead of earned. A Bluetooth bud stuck in one ear and a rolled paper tube gripped loosely in his hand. As he walked past Deshawn's seat, he let the paper slip. It unfurled in a soft flutter, landing open side up just inches from Deshawn's shoes. At first, he ignored it, but when the intern didn't pick it up and instead kept walking without turning back, Deshawn leaned forward. Curiosity outweighed caution. It was a sketch hand-drawn, colored with marker, and labeled in blocky red Sharpie at the top. Failed CEO Starter Pack. The drawing was crude, but unmistakable. The blazer, the plain shoes, the closed folio, even the short beard. It was him, or rather, a caricature of him. The figure was exaggerated, with awkward posture, sweat beads on his forehead, a question mark floating above his head, and little arrows pointing to things like no brand logo, unverified, and arrived early but still lost. Around the edges were sarcastic annotations, definitely not Ivy League, probably built an app in his basement, and asked to use the service elevator. Deshawn froze. Heat rushed to his face, not from embarrassment, but from the deep violation of being ridiculed so brazenly. No one else seemed to notice. Or maybe they did, but pretended not to. He sat there staring at it for a moment too long, until his fingers finally moved. He folded the sketch in half, then in half again, pressing each crease deliberately before slipping it into his folio without a word. He didn't need to ask who drew it. He already knew. It wasn't about the person, it was about the environment. This kind of cruelty didn't need names attached to thrive. It fed on silent permission. Less than 5 minutes later, as Deshawn tried to recenter himself, another disruption broke through. A man in a gray Ardent-branded hoodie crouched down near the table beside him, dragging a heavy-duty extension cord across the floor. The man wore thick glasses, a lanyard with several keys, and the casual confidence of someone who believed he owned the space he occupied. Without looking at Deshawn, he muttered, "Hey man, can you just tuck that under your chair for me? And move that table back a bit." The tone was casual, dismissive, unthinking. Not a request, but a command dressed as convenience. Deshawn blinked once and looked up. The tech staffer finally noticed the hesitation and looked directly at him for the first time. His face changed, just slightly, just enough to register the misjudgment, but he didn't apologize. Instead, he chuckled awkwardly and added, "Sorry, thought you were part of ops." Then he turned and walked away, trailing the cord with him. No effort to explain. No acknowledgement of the assumption. Just a vague grin that implied Deshawn should laugh it off too. He didn't. He didn't move. He didn't touch the cord. He just sat with the weight of that moment settling on top of all the others. The implication was clear. He looked like someone who should be cleaning the room, not presenting in it. He looked like someone who belonged behind the scenes, not on the agenda. The background noise continued unabated, casual investor banter, pitches being rehearsed aloud, someone bragging about their Harvard mentor. Deshawn's stomach tightened again, not from nerves, but from the accumulated weight of insults too small to protest, yet too sharp to forget. If he complained, he would become that guy. If he confronted, he would be labeled emotional. If he raised his voice, even slightly, the caricature they had already drawn of him would be confirmed in their eyes. So he did what he had done his whole life. He endured. He adjusted the folio on his lap. He smoothed the front of his blazer. He stared through the window at the endless skyline and reminded himself that he had survived far worse than this. He had built his company from scratch with no backing, no seed fund, no legacy networks. He had coded the prototype himself. He had knocked on 100 doors and kicked in 10 more. And still, it wasn't enough. He hadn't come this far to be laughed at like a janitor trying on a crown. Another staffer walked past and dropped a glossy pamphlet into each founder's lap. Ardent spotlight. Top 10 disruptive startups we're watching. Deshawn looked down. He wasn't listed. His company wasn't mentioned. There was no photo, no blurb, no quote. Yet another message. You're not even in the conversation. One that had made a calculated decision not to eject him, but to let him sit there and vanish under the weight of orchestrated irrelevance. Every founder whose name had been called had been granted access to the pitch floor, escorted politely into the chambers beyond the double glass doors. Not him. Not even a glance in his direction. Not even an apology. After what felt like another eternity of avoidance and silence, a new face emerged, an event coordinator wearing a sleek Navy badge labeled staff in silver lettering, walking with brisk purpose and scanning the room with a clipboard in hand. She called out a few more names, nodding briskly as hands went up. Deshawn stood carefully, waiting for a pause in her speech, and approached with quiet composure. "Excuse me," he began, his voice calm, practiced, polite despite the storm roiling under his skin. "Deshawn Rel, I was confirmed for the 9:45 slot. Rel Dynamics, still waiting on direction." She blinked at him, then glanced down at her clipboard. Her lips moved silently as her eyes swept the list once, twice, then again, slower. "Sorry," she said finally. "I don't have you on this list. Are you sure you're in the right building?" The absurdity of the question was so surreal he almost laughed, but he caught himself. "Yes," he replied, firmer now. "I have 2 confirmation emails and a printed agenda." He opened the folio and produced the documents, neatly printed, clearly marked, with the firm's logo at the top and his name listed among the speakers. She examined the page for all of 2 seconds before handing it back to him, unbothered, unflustered, unmoved. "It could be a back-end issue," she said dismissively. "Happens sometimes with third-party bookings. You'll need to check with logistics. That's on the 12th floor, room 12B. He stared at her, jaw tight, heart pounding, but said nothing. He nodded and turned away. The elevator ride back down was a quiet descent into something that didn't yet have a name. Not anger, not humiliation, not even disbelief. It was something older than that, something colder. A recognition not of an isolated error, but of deliberate exclusion posing as bureaucratic oversight. Room 12B on the 12th floor was a stark contrast to the polished upper levels. Low ceilings, flickering fluorescence, stained carpeting. The signage was taped to the wall with curling edges. When he stepped inside, a single staffer in a wrinkled shirt and headphones looked up from behind a folding table. "You a vendor?" the man asked automatically. Deshawn handed him the same confirmation printout. The man took it, looked confused, then pulled up a clunky spreadsheet on his laptop. "Name?" he asked. "Deshawn Rel, RELL." He typed slowly. The minutes ticked by. "Not showing anything in the 9:45 slot," the man finally said, scratching his neck. "Closest match is, wait, no, never mind. You weren't assigned a color code, which means you're not slotted for the main conference." Deshawn inhaled slowly. "That's incorrect." I was confirmed for the main track. I have the email. Yeah, look, I just managed the room keys. You'll need to get clearance upstairs again. The man handed back the paper like it was a napkin. They should have scanned you in when you first got here. Except they hadn't. The receptionist had waved him off. The assistant hadn't logged his arrival. The sign-in tablet had rerouted him like a misfiled invoice. He was being erased one administrative click at a time. Back in the elevator, he pressed 28 again. When the doors opened, the lounge was quieter now. Most of the early morning presenters had already gone through. Deshawn approached the same assistant from before, who now looked up from her tablet with a practiced smile. "Hi again," he said evenly. "I was told to come back up. Rel Dynamics. I should be in the 9:45 slot. It's past 10 now." She frowned, typing something again. "Like I said earlier, there's no entry for that name. But if logistics cleared you, I guess you can wait by conference room A, and someone will let you in." He walked down the corridor she pointed toward. Conference room A was just past a frosted glass wall, its doors heavy and lined with steel trim. Through the frosted paneling, he could see the shadows of people seated, a projection moving across the wall, and someone standing, pitching. His stomach clenched. It had begun. The session had already started. He reached for the door, but it didn't budge. Locked. He knocked once, twice. No answer. He checked for a nearby staffer. No one. He waited. Still nothing. Minutes passed. Then a soft burst of laughter echoed from inside. Then more voices, overlapping, excited. The kind of energy that followed a joke or a dramatic pitch turn. He stared at the door handle, then at the frosted glass again, watching the silhouettes. He should have been in that room, not outside it. The room was spacious and impeccably designed, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, plush chairs arranged in intimate clusters, and minimalist artwork that whispered of power and influence. Yet, none of the warmth one might expect from such surroundings reached Deshawn as he stepped through the threshold. The hum of conversation dimmed for a moment as a mid-level manager named Greg, known for his meticulous attention to detail and his thinly veiled disdain for those he deemed unworthy, locked eyes on him. Greg was leaning casually against a sleek glass table, wiping it down with a disinfectant wipe, his movements deliberate and slow. As Deshawn approached, Greg's gaze sharpened, zeroing in on the empty seat beside him. With exaggerated care, Greg took the wipe and began cleaning the chair, moving the fabric slowly, as if erasing any trace that Deshawn might be tempted to occupy it. The action was silent but eloquent, a public display of exclusion designed to humiliate. No words were spoken, but the message was unmistakable. You do not belong here. Deshawn felt every eye in the room subtly shift toward him, some with curiosity, others with thinly disguised amusement. He met Greg's stare evenly, refusing to look away, though the sharpness of the moment carved a hollow ache in his chest. As Greg finished wiping, he straightened up and turned away without so much as a nod or acknowledgement, leaving Deshawn standing alone in the space between power and invisibility. Before he could move, another figure emerged, a young staffer, Emily, responsible for managing seating arrangements and presentation logistics. She moved with the brisk efficiency of someone used to enforcing unspoken rules. With a swift motion, she reached for Deshawn's leather laptop bag resting on the armrest of the nearest chair. Without asking, she slid it carefully onto the floor, then placed a crisp, laminated placard on the seat where the bag had rested. The sign bore bold letters, reserved for lead investors only. The placard was angled so that anyone entering the lounge could see it clearly, as if marking territory. Deshawn bent to retrieve his bag, but the act of removing it from the chair had already sealed the message. His presence was an intrusion, an error to be corrected. Around him, the room hummed with the chatter of well-dressed executives discussing deal flow and market trends. None of them approached. None offered assistance or invited him to join. The subtle orchestration of his isolation was nearly flawless. Deshawn could almost admire the precision with which his exclusion was being managed, a dance of gestures so quiet that they could be mistaken for politeness. yet so deliberate they left no room for misinterpretation. He glanced at the placard again and then at the seat, feeling the weight of the invisible boundary drawn between himself and the elite circle that populated this room. His mind raced to find words that could undo this moment, to ask for a seat, to demand recognition. But each impulse was silenced by years of experience navigating spaces where he was never quite welcome. Instead, he folded the laptop bag close to his chest and took a small step back. He found a spot near the wall, leaning against the cool surface, the slight hum of the air conditioning the only sound accompanying the pounding in his ears. The room seemed to pulse around him with the energy of opportunity missed, of conversations he would never be part of decisions made in whispered tones just beyond his reach. Moments later, the catering staff wheeled a silver cart laden with champagne and hors d'oeuvres through the lounge. Servers moved with practiced smiles, offering glasses to everyone, except Deshawn. He watched as a fluted glass was handed to a founder whose smile gleamed with the certainty of future success. Then to a venture capitalist who laughed heartily at a joke told just out of his earshot. Then to another guest, the CEO of a recent unicorn startup. And then the server passed him by without so much as a glance. His fingers, though steady, betrayed a slight tremor as he unzipped his laptop bag and pulled out his computer. The sleek device slid open with a soft click, and the soft glow of the screen cast a pale light over his focused expression. He opened the presentation file, a culmination of months of work, late nights, and fierce dedication. His heart surged with quiet pride as the first slide loaded. A sleek design, the company logo bold and clear, charts promising rapid growth and scalable innovation. But before he could even start rehearsing aloud, the room's lighting shifted. A sudden flicker caught his eye, and he glanced up toward the main projector mounted on the ceiling. To his horror, the crisp company logo and neatly arranged bullet points dissolved and were replaced by a crudely animated cartoon. It was an unflattering caricature of a man who looked just like him. Oversized glasses, awkward posture, and a panicked expression frozen on the animated face. Above the figure floated bold text, CEO who got lost. The animation looped on repeat, showing the cartoon fumbling with a briefcase and bumping into walls, an exaggerated parody of ineptitude and confusion. Deshawn's breath caught. Around the room, a few heads turned, some stifling chuckles, others casting uneasy glances his way. No one stopped it. No one reached to change it. It was an open, brazen attack disguised as a technical glitch. His hands clenched briefly on the edge of the laptop, but he refused to slam it shut. The laptop was his weapon, his only foothold in a room that refused to welcome him. Just then, a tall woman in a crisp blazer strode past the rows of seats, clipboard in hand. Her name was Sandra, the event coordinator responsible for managing the schedule and flow of presentations. She moved with brisk efficiency, barely sparing a glance toward Deshawn's struggling laptop screen. Her voice, when it came, was calm but cutting through the low murmurs like a blade. Due to technical changes, she announced to the room, the presentation for Mr. Rell is being rescheduled to the end of the agenda. The phrase hung heavy in the air. Those familiar with the rhythm of venture pitches knew exactly what that meant. The end of the agenda was a euphemism, a polite way of saying the presentation was effectively canceled, a polite shelving for a slot that might never arrive. The collective response was a muted mix of polite nods, subtle smirks, and shifting seats. No one challenged the decision. No one questioned the sudden technical changes. Deshawn swallowed hard, refusing to show the wave of frustration and disbelief rising inside him. The room continued as if nothing had happened, a veneer of professionalism masking the undercurrents of exclusion. He looked around, eyes searching for even one sign of solidarity, but found none. The fellow founders who had once whispered behind their hands now avoided his gaze altogether. The laughter and light chatter resumed, but its warmth was gone. Instead, the atmosphere grew colder, sterile, and unwelcoming. Deshawn's pulse quickened not from nerves, but from the profound isolation of knowing that the very platform he had worked so hard to earn had been taken from him. Not by chance, but by design. He closed the laptop with a soft snap, the sound swallowed in the room's low hum. Despite the calculated humiliation, despite the growing sense of invisibility, he had a secret, a power hidden beneath the surface of a carefully choreographed exclusion. As the clock neared 11 o'clock, a sudden hush fell over the crowd, a subtle shift that whispered of something imminent. Without warning, the large framed artwork that had hung prominently behind the boardroom's head table began to descend smoothly, pivoting down and revealing a massive, ultra-high-definition LCD screen. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. The screen flickered, then came to life with an interface that was unfamiliar to all but the highest-ranking executives of the firm, a dashboard of incredible complexity, displaying real-time data feeds, sensitive project pipelines, investment metrics, and confidential personnel files. The name Ardent Capital Internal Systems was stamped in the upper left corner in crisp blue letters. The room, filled with people who had been laughing and networking just moments before, instantly grew still, their eyes fixed on the screen as it began a sequence, a login prompt glowing at the center of the display. Then, with a quiet beep, the camera embedded in the screen activated, sweeping the room in a slow, deliberate scan. Deshawn's heart pounded in his chest, but he remained still. The facial recognition software locked onto him instantly. The room's attention shifted toward him as the software confirmed the match. His face appeared on the screen, framed and highlighted with a bright blue box. The login process began automatically. No need for password or token. The screen then displayed his credentials in bold letters. Super user, D.Rel Executive Authority Level 1A. Alongside his user ID, the screen listed permissions and authority levels that far exceeded those of any other person present, including the firm's board members and senior partners. The scheduled event for that moment appeared below his user ID, Live Ethics Audit Boardroom Session 3. A description explained that this session was a real-time monitoring and evaluation of the board's compliance with the firm's code of ethics, including assessments of individual behavior, fairness in funding decisions, and adherence to internal anti-discrimination policies. The realization hit the room like a shockwave. Every whispered joke, every dismissive glance, every act of exclusion that had piled up against Deshawn was now on display for scrutiny, not just by him, but by an impartial, unblinking system that analyzed data without prejudice. Eyes widened, mouths parted. The conference attendees froze, caught between disbelief and the dawning understanding that the man they had been quietly sidelining was not only a founder, not only a presenter, but the highest executive controlling the very system that governed their fates. Deshawn's posture remained calm, his face serene as he let the moment settle over them. No need for grand speeches or angry confrontations. The power was now visual, undeniable, silent, but absolute. Slowly, the murmurs began, first low and scattered, then growing louder as confusion gave way to shock. People pulled out phones to snap pictures, to capture the screen, to share the moment that shattered their carefully constructed hierarchy. But Deshawn did not flinch. Instead, he took a slow step forward, signaling the beginning of a reckoning long overdue. The room's atmosphere shifted from exclusion to apprehension, from dismissal to accountability. Those who had mocked, who had conspired in subtle ways to push him aside, now faced the cold light of their own complicity. The live audit dashboard continued to refresh, revealing detailed behavioral analytics, facial expression tracking, and even voice pattern recognition from earlier conversations, highlighting patterns of bias and unfair treatment. Deshawn's face appeared again alongside a list of his contributions, investments, and decisions that had grown the firm's portfolio by millions, illustrating the deep irony of his treatment. This visual, silent declaration of his status transformed the entire event. A sidebar lit up with the heading Northvale Strategic Investment Council, Ethics and Equity Audit, accompanied by a sleek emblem of intertwined pillars symbolizing justice and corporate responsibility. The data began to flow. Cameras hidden in corners captured every angle of the room, every flicker of expression, every micro-gesture. The software parsed voices, isolating phrases that reflected bias, dismissiveness, or microaggressions. A heat map overlaid the seating chart, highlighting pockets of discomfort, sneers, and side glances. Each name was tagged, each interaction logged, and scored against strict corporate ethics criteria. The people in the room now realized that their every move, every whisper, every subtle exclusion was cataloged and scrutinized. The air thickened as those once so confident found their faces illuminated not by admiration, but by the unblinking eye of accountability. Deshawn stood quietly at the back, the image of calm in the storm. There was no triumphant smile, no angry accusation. His presence alone was a testament to the reversal of fortune. The council that he presided over was not merely a formality. It was a force with the power to transform culture, redistribute influence, and enforce justice in a world that too often turned a blind eye. As the dashboard revealed graphs correlating historical funding decisions with implicit bias scores, murmurs grew louder. Data points indicated patterns of favoritism toward founders of certain backgrounds and a marked exclusion of others, with a high correlation to factors like appearance, accent, and assumed pedigree. One panel flashed a live transcript of recent comments made during the day's sessions. Several lines were tagged with the label Bias Flag Active Monitoring, highlighting the very microaggressions and dismissals Deshawn had endured silently. The names attached to these remarks belonged to some of the most senior executives in the room, the same people who had smirked, whispered, and effectively sidelined him earlier. Faces turned pale as the software cued video snippets corresponding to those moments. A slow-motion replay of a dismissive hand gesture, the subtle shaking of a head, a contemptuous smirk caught mid-laugh. The council's live feed also displayed anonymized sentiment analysis, showing overall mood shifts, from initial confidence to confusion, from dismissal to unease. The juxtaposition was stark and undeniable. Outside the sterile coldness of data, the room's atmosphere thickened with the weight of recognition and impending consequences. Deshawn took a deliberate step forward as the screen displayed a summary of his own contributions to the company's growth, multi-million-dollar investments, successful exits, groundbreaking innovation projects, all tied to his leadership and vision. The irony was bitter but complete. The man dismissed as an outsider was in fact the architect of much of the firm's success. No words were exchanged as eyes met his. The room was caught in a moment of reckoning. One of the senior partners, whose bias was prominently flagged on the dashboard, shifted uncomfortably and swallowed hard, casting a furtive glance at colleagues. No one spoke. No one interrupted. The software's presence was a mute arbiter, an infallible judge beyond influence or denial. The silent dominance Deshawn wielded was perhaps the most powerful kind. He held the authority not through volume or force, but through undeniable truth and data-backed justice. Every slight, every exclusion, every whispered insult now served as evidence against those who perpetuated inequality within the firm. The giant screen flickered intermittently, cycling through a series of stark statistics, heat maps, and video snippets that bore silent testimony to the repeated microaggressions and subtle but damaging behaviors perpetrated by some of the firm's most influential players. While the dashboard fed this unblinking stream of truth, the faces in the room gradually shifted from smug confidence to pale discomfort and quiet panic. Deshawn stood near the back, his expression calm, but his mind racing as he absorbed the unfolding scene. Suddenly, the tension crystallized when a young woman in a sharply tailored black suit, identified by a small lapel pin as an assistant from the ethics division, entered the room. She moved with the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to delivering difficult news, without drama or delay. Without addressing the room or offering any explanation, she approached Mark Phillips, a senior team lead known for his dismissive attitude and offhand jokes about Deshawn. Phillips was mid-conversation, caught unaware. The assistant's eyes met his briefly before she gestured silently toward the door. Confused murmurs rose from the seated executives as Phillips stood, casting a bewildered glance at his colleagues before following her out without protest. No words were spoken. The removal was clinical, devoid of fanfare, but it reverberated like a gunshot through the room. The weight of consequences had just begun to settle. With Phillips gone, an immediate shift rippled through the assembly. Conversations halted. Phones were discreetly pocketed. The screen now displayed a formal notification. Ethics review, immediate action taken. Deschamps' eyes followed as the dashboard illuminated the names of several event staff members, the ones responsible for organizing the day's proceedings. Their profiles were flagged with a red icon indicating serious breaches. Minutes later, a security officer entered the room, quietly accompanied by a middle manager. They moved methodically through the conference area, escorting out the members of the event planning team one by one. There were no protests, no explanations offered to the wider group. The scene was reminiscent of a swift corporate purge, quiet, effective, and unmistakably final. Outside the boardroom, whispers escalated to audible chatter. Deschamps caught fragments of conversations, phrases like ethics violation, immediate suspension, and internal investigation floated through the air. By mid-morning, a crisp internal memo had been posted on the door to the firm's public relations office. Its headline, typed in bold black letters, read, "Subject to review ethics breach in executive reception." The memo outlined that a full investigation was underway concerning violations of the company's code of conduct during the morning's pitch event. It reminded all staff and attendees that the firm maintained a strict zero-tolerance policy toward discrimination and unfair treatment. The memo was both a shield and a sword, signaling that the firm was taking the matter seriously, but also exposing the depth of the scandal. Back inside, the atmosphere had transformed completely. The boardroom no longer buzzed with the excitement of deal-making, but simmered with unease and a growing sense of vulnerability. Executives exchanged furtive glances, knowing their behaviors had been recorded and analyzed in granular detail. Those once so confident and in control now faced the uncomfortable reality that their reputations, careers, and futures might be on the line. Deschamps remained composed, observing the unfolding reckoning with the steady patience of someone who had weathered storms far worse. His silence carried weight. It was the silence of justice delivered without vindictiveness. The tension in the boardroom had reached a climax, yet the resolution unfolded not with dramatic confrontation or fiery speeches, but with quiet, decisive action that resonated far beyond the walls of the conference center. Following the live ethics audit and the swift removal and suspension of key personnel responsible for the orchestrated exclusion and humiliation of Deschamps, the leadership of Ardent Capital convened in an emergency session. The data and behavioral evidence revealed by the internal system had irrevocably altered the firm's approach to investment and governance. A new policy was drafted and ratified within hours, mandating that all funding candidate shortlists undergo a rigorous review process incorporating ethical assessments alongside financial and technological criteria. The immediate impact was felt across the portfolio. Any startups led by individuals implicated in the discriminatory behaviors, either directly through actions or indirectly through association, were disqualified. This was not a temporary measure. It was a permanent realignment of the firm's values and priorities. Transparency and equity had become foundational pillars, replacing the tacit acceptance of exclusion that had once been woven into the firm's culture. Deschamps stood quietly at the edge of this transformation, watching the unfolding change with a calm satisfaction that came not from vengeance, but from justice served. He knew that the fight for fairness was never won by one person alone, but through collective awakening and unwavering commitment. As the meeting adjourned, the room emptied and the massive LED screen behind the boardroom's main table lit up once more. Bright, bold letters illuminated the space, catching the attention of everyone present and those outside who would soon hear of this watershed moment. The message was simple yet powerful. We do not fund innovation built on ignorance. The words seemed to pulse with an undeniable truth, a declaration that excellence was inseparable from integrity. Below, it appeared a second line: integrity is not negotiable. These messages were not just statements, they were a promise, a pledge, and a challenge to the entire industry. Deschamps turned away from the screen and toward the exit, his silhouette framed by the glow of these words. He walked steadily, not glancing back, carrying with him the knowledge that a new chapter was beginning. Outside the building, The city was bathed in the golden hues of late afternoon sun, a world waiting to be changed by the ripples of today's reckoning. As Deshawn exited the glass doors, the faces of passers-by reflected no knowledge of the seismic shifts within those walls, yet the air was charged with the promise of transformation. He knew that real justice transcended moments of confrontation. It was built on persistent dedication, on systems designed to hold power accountable, and on a culture brave enough to face its flaws and commit to better. The humiliation, the exclusion, the silent battles fought throughout the day had forged something stronger, a movement toward equity that would redefine what success meant not just for him, but for every founder who dared to dream beyond boundaries imposed by bias. In the days that followed, news of Ardent Capital's internal reforms spread rapidly through the industry, sparking conversations and inspiring other firms to examine their own cultures. Deshawn's story became a beacon, illustrating that change was possible when courage met conviction and technology was harnessed to expose truth. His journey from marginalized outsider to commanding authority stood as a testament to resilience and the power of justice without fanfare. The end. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like and consider subscribing so you don't miss what happens next. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think about the plot twist and the way justice unfolded? Also, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. Your support and feedback mean a lot.